than us men tend to. And that is really refreshing to be around. So to all the women out there in the crowd tonight and all of you at home, this evening is for you. And with that, I would like to introduce to you two women who I've known for a very long time, ever since the paddle bike and hike along happened down in Teji.
Wow. Yeah, I feel like
2005, circa 2005. I would like to introduce to you Leisel and Gabby.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear okay in the back? Awesome. And at home. I'm Gabrielle, and this is Leisel. We're so pumped to be here tonight to share with you some of our stories. It's a real privilege to have some of your time, and it's not lost on us the importance to share some women's tripping stories. However, it's not just our story to tell, so we have some other whiskey girls that we've reached out to and gotten them to weave in some of their voices for this presentation. Yeah, so let's kick her off, Jared. So we'll give you a bit of an overview, how it started the crew, some of the trips that we've been on, some assumptions and disclaimers, so always like throwing those in there. 3 areas of focus, what we call the recipes for success, why these trips are different, and what we mean by that is why these trips are different than the trips that we go on with our families and our other friends. And then talk a bit about the wilderness and what it means to us. If we have time, we'll touch on a couple of tips and next steps. Jared.
So started in 2017. I was really sure to change my relationship after 15 years ended. That's been a little lost. I wasn't sure what I was going to do for myself and really needed a plan to anchor myself around something and wanted an adventure. I think we all of us girls have been having babies and looked into the last 7 years and figured a way to reconnect with ourselves and with adventure. So I sent an email to about 7 years ago to see if I want to be interested in the Waldenverse in Newfoundland. I had been there years before and had seen people getting off the ferry to head out on the country club. One day I'm going to do that. And so I sent the email out, hoping to find maybe one person to go do it with. And right away, truly, it's amazing and awesome. Wrote back and said, yes, I'm in. So I'm there. I was so surprised to be able to find that. And I think the reason I want to talk so quickly was we were all ready in a time in our lives. We all wanted to have an adventure, reconnect with ourselves, and get back out into nature. And so that's when those heroes came.
Thank you, Jen. So this is what I like to call our dream team. On the left, you have Leisel. We have Rachel, Jen, who's on the video. The really tall girl next to her is me. And then that's from one of our first trips and one of our last trips. We have extended crew with AJ right there. So why we call this the dream team, we'll explain it a bit throughout our stories that we share tonight, but really to give you a bit of context for those of you who don't know us, we come from a variety of disciplines and backgrounds, everything from kayak guides to trail runners to competitive or national athletes. We like to do a bit of everything, probably from cycling to hiking and all the in between. And we also wear a lot of hats. So we're professors, we're directors, we're public servants, as fun as that sounds. We're mentors, we're coaches, but there's a common thread for all of us, and that's we're all over 40, newly minted myself, and we all answer to a really, really important title that is probably the most challenging at times, and it's the title of mom. So when Jen put out that email, that call for adventure, our kids were finally old enough and we were all so ready to pick up the phone and answer that call.
Thanks, Gabby. So I'm Leisel. So much. So I'm going to take a few minutes actually just to describe some of the trips that we go on. Even though that's not going to be the focus of our presentation tonight, we're going to talk more about, well, what do we get out of it and what do we put into it and why is it that we do these. But I know that there's enough people in this room who are going to say, and what do you do? Well, this is what we do. So Jen did a great introduction. In our first trip, we did the long-range traverse in northern and western Newfoundland. And so for the Newfoundlanders in the room, you know exactly where you are, but for the rest of us, this is the west coast of Newfoundland, just by Rosemore National Park. And the trip, you take the ferry in on the Western Brook Pond, which is that closed-in fjord you see at the top of the picture there. You take off at the ferry and then hike up the end of the fjord, and then you spend the next 4 to X number of days hiking south and then back west down towards Rosemore National Park. And so this is the one we did in 2017, and it was the sort of the kickoff of our trip. And so that was Gabby, myself, Rachel, and Jen. And then, so next slide, please. So here's a few photos from the adventure, and we could show you thousands of photos. We've peppered them throughout, but just to give you a snapshot, so the one on the far left there is an image looking back down through the fjord, just getting that far, which is actually only about halfway out. I see a lot of nods. Maybe there's some people in the room who've done this trip. It's actually only halfway up, and getting out of the fjord took us probably 4.5 hours. Now, it probably could have taken us less, but it took us 4.5 hours to get up and out. And so the top right there, what you see is, what some of the terrain looked like going up. And in the bottom, there are some of the crossings and some of what it looked like once you get up onto the top plateau, which is, unbelievable unto itself. But I'm going to let Rachel describe what that hike was like.
There is no set trail to follow to each navigation, especially since there's a lot of animal trails that you kind of get lost in.
So in sum, it's not for the faint of heart. We're really grateful it exists, but don't follow the game trails. And I'll get back onto that one in a second, because it turns out you should trust your compass and not the game trail. So next slide, please. So that was our first trip. There's been a couple in between, and I'm going to focus on one from 2020. But just to give you a sense of what we've been doing in the intermediary years, in 2018, with a number of other fantastic friends, we went on a sea kayaking trip on the 100 wild islands off the eastern shore. Again, I see lots of nods. That tells me many of you have been there. So we did a 5-day sea kayaking trip. This was a trip of a very different nature, so I won't spend so much time on it. But we did happen to launch the day after the cyclone moved through, so there was some pretty epic rollers coming in that day. And then for obvious reasons, that's not what I have a picture of. I have a picture of a really nice day. 2019 was meant to be the Seawall Trail, which again, we have a thing for picking trails that aren't trails. But the Seawall Trail might one day exist, and what we were going to do is trace the northwestern shore of Cape Breton. And for various reasons, family, PhD defenses, internects, we didn't do that. But Jen and Rachel were able to do it. And so this is
half of it.
Not even half. So they did start, and they faced some pretty intense navigation and fog that was so thick I don't think that they could see the end of their noses. And so they actually had to turn around. And as a result, Gabby and I told them that they had to run Chignecto twice just to make up for it. But that's what we've been doing in the intermediary years. We'll go to the next one. So 2020, we decided, well, let's try it again. We're all healthy and all of these other hard life things are out of the way. And then Rachel went and tore her hamstring. No, not hamstring, calf muscle. Right? So in order to sort of down-regulate the amount of leg use we would have to have, we decided to go on a canoeing trip instead. And so for this trip, we picked up fantastic crew member Anjanette LeMay, and Gabby managed to gain 5 inches. And we did this in 4 days. It's a shout out to Dave here, who was actually gave us a lot of intel on this trip. 4 days, 17 portraits. I think there's a typo there. It should say 47.
It was 18, but we didn't do one.
So we called it hiking with canoes, which was great for the injured calf muscle. You guys can all imagine. Next slide, please. So here's an example of us hiking with our canoes in a dry riverbed. And then on the right-hand side there, you can see it's a bit of a Blair Witch Project if you're thinking not everybody will get that reference. So let's just, Anjanette is going to show us now what some of the portraits
Alright, so now, let's try a bit wet. Yep, it's down on this rock. But here's that.
Don't step on my shoelaces. Next, I'm going to turn it back to Gabby. She's going to give us some of her disclaimers.
So we probably have less than 15 minutes left. We could obviously tell you a lot of stories, so we'll save it for another time. So our disclaimers are, you picked a couple that were relevant to their themes. We actually had the opportunity to get together last weekend and to chat about, like, what should we talk about? And this theme and trips are a microcosm of life just kept on hitting us, and they really are. Within some of our stories, you'll see our highs and lows of the trip. And some of the lows, to Leisel's point earlier, they're not omitted to make our trip look really great. We're obviously not professional photographers or videographers. We just don't have a lot of pictures or videos of them because it was during really ethically hard moments. Like some of those portages, Dave, right?
They're really hard.
They're really hard. And poor Rachel, this was her first portage trip, and she was like, is this what portage trips are like? And we were like, this is really fun. And there was barely any paddling. I'm not selling the trip. It was a beautiful trip. You'll see with some of the photos. And the last point here is that, as you can tell, like, we're pretty regular, relatable people. We're not sponsored by anyone. We use a lot of our kids' gear at times. Well, I do. But at the end of the day, like, we hope that, like, for especially some people at home watching us, like, you see yourself in here. But all of our stories and some of our, like, tips, you know, they're not meant to be prescriptive. They're meant to take what you want out of them.
It's me. I'm the nutritionist. We do recipes. Okay, so this is now trip number 5. We have a pretty good recipe for success. We're dialed in. The first thing you need to do is you need to pack your Costco card. Right? Yeah. So we showed up at the Halifax International Airport on our way to Deer Lake, Newfoundland to go hiking, and Ms. Gallagher brought her Costco card as her ID, which they don't accept, even in America. They don't accept it. And so some of you know Gabby pretty well, and you know that she's a really fast runner. So this is how it unfolded. The rest of us normal humans went through the airport like all normal humans do. You check in, right? You drop your bags, you go through security, and then you head to the gate. Yeah? So Gabby leaves the airport. We had done a park and fly. Ran back to the park and fly, got a car, went back to Dartmouth, picked up proper ID, back to the airport, back to the park and fly, because we didn't want to, oh, maybe you went to
I went to the
parking house.
car.
Back into the airport, we had checked her bag, they did allow us that. Checked in, went through security, and I just want to show of hands, who thinks that Gabby got on the airplane first? Yeah. Yes, she did. Yes, she sat there on an empty plane while we were still in security. So Costco card is always a good idea. Pack everything, chop it in half, especially if you're rusty at hiking trips, you only need half of what you think that you need. But for us, the really important pieces are actually the other pieces that you need, right? You need a really awesome support crew. So this is where we do a shout out to all the partners who take care of our children while we are away, the physiotherapists who doctor us up when we get back, to Judy, who makes us a cake to take on trip every time. No, I'm just kidding. But we would never take a cake, but she packs our first aid kit. She's an emergency room nurse, which is always a good person to have. Of all the partners, Jamie gets a special shout out because he built us a boat trailer for the last trip. That's a pretty good support crew. So people to support your trip, unless you have Arc'teryx, that's also a good idea, but we don't. Trust in each other, knowing that you can, that you know that your people are going to be honest with you about the degree of injury that they're really describing, or that you can just be yourself. But probably the two most important are that you're all in it for similar reasons. Know that you have the same priorities and that you want to get the same things out of your trip. I feel like I'm speaking to a room full of people who probably know that. But Gabby's going to expand on that later. That's a really important piece. We've probably all been on the, what did Kevin calls it, the float and bloat, right? And if that's not what you want out of your trip, right, make sure you're on the trip with the right people. That's critical. And then things get really, really hard. So make sure you mix in a lot of laughter, which you can see is not that hard when you trip with Gabby. And then they also can get really painful. So make sure you have enough whiskey that you can have a good sleep. Necessary. See the theme. Okay, back over to you, Gab.
All right, so as Leisel said, the key ingredient. How many people have made sourdough bread ever, let alone in 2020? Can I see some hands? Sourdough bread?
2020 was
okay, so this ingredient would be like trying to make sourdough bread without your sourdough starter. Does it work? And no. So we have tried other trips with other friends, and really for us, for these trips, what it comes down to is this key ingredient that we're all in it for the challenge. So, chatting to folks about some of the trips that we wanted to do, some people have even had the audacity to say, that's really hard, right? And that's why we're in it. Actually, a qualifier, I'm not looking at you, Dave, but a qualifier for one of these trips for us is usually at least one moment on the trip, we say like, why the heck did I sign myself up for this? So that's one key thing, that if we lose that and we lose the challenge, then it's not quite the same for us. This is a really important piece. Discomfort and pain are all a part of it. See notes on whiskey. And I put this here. It's got to be the right trip pick. And below it, the one chick. So in our lives and our realities, it's not like we have 5-6 weeks to play around with. Not in the next foreseeable couple years. We've got like one trip a year to have our big adventure without our family, and we got to make it worth that one shit. So we keep it in mind when we do our trip planning. Okay, this is a great picture. This picture is from the very first day of our very first Whiskey Girl trip. So, can I see hands? Has anyone been down Western Brook Pond in Grossmore? Yes. So you buy a ticket, and you get on this chartered boat, and usually there's about 50 people on the boat. Yeah, sure, 50 people on the boat. And the boat takes you about a two probably 3-hour return trip down this beautiful fjord, Western Brook Pond. And if you're doing the long range traverse, you go down Western Brook Pond, and there's like a 10x10 dock. And you get off at the dock and you start that beautiful trip that Leisel introduced us to. But most of the people, I'd say like 40 of the 50 people, I'm being really specific here. They stay on the boat, they've got their binoculars, they got their picnic, and they're heading back. There's about 10 people on the boat that we know are there for the trip. So there's 4 of us, you know, roughly in our 40s from the East Coast doing our first ever, like, kids are big enough, I'm doing my own adventure trip. And of the other people on the boat, and it still blows my mind, of the other people on the boat, there are 4 women, 20 years our senior, from the West Coast, and they have been doing these like adventure without kids trips for 20 years. So, however, so this moment, you better believe that they told us what we had to obviously do. At this moment, not only are we smiling our faces off, it's our TSM turning point. And it's that point for 3 reasons. Number 1, the universe is clearly giving us a sign, right? Number 2, it really, really solidified for us that this wasn't a one-off thing. This was clearly beyond. This is the first day of our trip, and it clearly told us that we were up for much, much more than that. And the third piece is, thanks to these women, they really gave us the permission to make this a priority for ourselves.
So we'd like to come back in 20 years. So a few other pieces that are really key is that these trips are very different. One is that we carry pretty heavy loads in our everyday lives, right? So with our, you know, all of the other hats that we wear, and I'm sure that you all wear, like it can sometimes feel like a lot. And one of the things that trips really do for us, and as Gabby pointed out, we want the challenge. This is not the floating boat. We want something that's going to really work us. Because it allows us to come back feeling stronger, right? And to be able to carry the load that you carry in everyday lives. And unlike your everyday life, sometimes you can just take the load off, or you can take your pack off and you can just rest your back for a little bit. And that's not always possible in our daily lives. But it does also give us that freedom to just wear that one hat, even if it's only for 5 days or whatever. We just got that one role in life, and it's to get up and through and out the other end without injuring anything. But you come back stronger, and that's a really, really important part of it. And then the other part of it is about the freedom and space, and for this I'm going to read a quote from Jeanette LeMay, who says it like this: "This is about the freedom and space and ability to, thanks Dave, to connect with each other." It's true, everything that he said is true. That we are out there to connect with nature and with each other. So Anjanette said, "It's sublimely restorative to have a few consecutive days of companionship, laughter, challenge, self-reliance, and stretching my wings and skills of living out of doors. These trips are non-judgmental places of risk-taking and time where we can be our true, full, and unadorned selves. It's an essential time out of the routines and demands of being working parents. The days are just as long and full, and it doesn't matter if the portage takes a long time. It can take a really long time." That's my quote. Or one of us just needs a break for a while. We just let it go, and we'll get there together. And when we get there, we'll be there together. So I think that's a really nice way. Thanks, Anjanette, for capturing that need for freedom and space. Next slide. Gabby, I think it's over to you. Wilderness.
Thanks.
You've got 2
Time
minutes.
for time. 2 minutes. New problem. I'm just going through my head what I'm going to do here. I'm going to invite you all. This is one of my favorite pictures, one of my favorite moments from our last trips. It was the last morning of our trip, and it's just a spectacular spot. And I invite you to get lost in the picture a bit. I'm curious to know, is it, you know, the bold blues that catch your eye? Is it that almost, you know, precise line across the water where, you know, the land and sky are starting to be mirrored? This, to all of us, this is where it's at. This is where we like to be lost in and connected to. So You already stole our line. Connecting, not crushing, not conquering. It's really key for everyone in our group and we all share the common value of an approach of reciprocity with nature, that there's a deep respect. And I would have to say, being in these places and spaces offer us, as I'm sure you're all familiar with, and I hope you continue to be connected with, it's almost an opportunity for a deep remembering that resonates within us well beyond the days of the trip. This is a really hilarious story, but I don't think we have time.
I can do it quickly.
We can reenact it.
It sounds
Okay, let me say. Notice how fashionable I am. Functional, fashionable, long sleeve shirt, tucked in pants, built from the 90s, pants and the boots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then of all the people, Gabby's the only one with her boots, or her pants tucked into her boots and everything tucked in. And she somehow
We call it the Glenn Coleman.
She somehow manages to fill her pants with wasps while going through one of them. Anyway. So we spoke about getting stronger, so I know that I'm actually strong enough to pick up Gabby and shake the wasps out of her.
No, you kicked my pants off.
I was just hoping I didn't take the pants off. Next slide. It can get really uncomfortable, so we soaked her lower half in whiskey that time. So this is all really nice. Yes, it's about connected, and yes, it's about being one with each other and with nature, but quite frankly, there's no trail on anything that we pick, it seems. And so hard skills are really important, and this is an image of a day where we just nailed our navigation, and then we got distracted, as Rachel described, we got distracted by the game trail, right? It had fresh human boot prints in it, and I think we were legitimately distracted. But it probably took us off the trail for the entire morning, half a day, actually.
4 hours.
It's fine. It's fine. So that's Gabby kissing the rock that we had originally taken her bearing off of when we finally got back to the rock that we were supposed to see hours and hours and hours ago. And so in addition to all of that, we all come from a space where maybe long ago we spent a lot of time honing these skills. And so that's also a really important part of it. It turns out those hard skills are also really important. You can't just commune with nature if you also want to get out that way. Okay, so let's just click through the next few. These are just a couple of images because I feel like we make it sound like they're awful trips. You can just keep going. So it turns out the canoe trip was beautiful, even if you could see both portages from where we were. There we go. So that's it. So we have a handful of tips that we can end on next. I'll turn it over to Gabby and then we'll wrap up.
I'll let you look at these. I think that the big one is a shout out. Local recent info when possible. Thank you. Dave, A for Adventure always kills the local info. We'll leave these up here, but I will do my wrap-up slide. So, yeah, go to the wrap-up slide. So don't wait until you're on a boat on the east coast of Newfoundland and you have this like serendipitous moment. Give yourself permission. And for any of those parents out there, like honestly, give yourself the permission to make it a priority and just do it. And to borrow a quote from Gord Downey, no dress rehearsal, like, do it. We have some ideas on deck for future trips. I got a new sub touring board for my 40th, so that's what I'm voting for. The last thing we want to say is there's some incredible resources out there for women specifically, for adventurers all across Nova Scotia. Again, the fellows at A for Adventure are such a great resource. But for women specifically, I know that there's some other speakers tonight that are going to talk about those steps or those what I like to call on-ramps for adventure. Because when we come off these trips, we have a lot of our lady friends saying, "Can I come on the next one?" or "How do I get started?" And usually the answer is, "No, you can't come on the next one." No. But there's some really key opportunities and some guiding hands out there, and I really encourage you in Nova Scotia, we're so lucky to have great resources like that. And C. Thank you very much.